Hello, this is Tuesday, September 25th, 2018. This is SR Tallie hypothesis, the other side of the Iran Contra. If the Jamaicans have Uzis, then they got them from Iran. Now, in the part 3B especially, I have been talking about the Italian Mafia. Now, the title of the documentary series that I'm trying to put together is called Crime Perspective Today, Making Amends, telling our side of the story. How did I get here? And this is regarding the African-American criminal culture in Dallas, Texas. Now let's go into the Italian Mafia. Dallas, Texas used to be a distribution center as it relates to drugs for the Italian Mafia. That means the Italian Mafia used to bring drugs to Dallas, Texas, and those who assisted the Mafia would transport the drugs to other cities. And as I mentioned, used to be. I don't know what's going on right now. So let's talk about Mr. Carlo Piranio. I'm going to read this verbatim. He was a native of Sicily, immigrated to the U.S. In 1901 with his brother Joseph. They first settled in Shreveport, Louisiana. Carlo began the Dallas fraction of the American Mafia in 1921 with Joseph as his underboss. Carlo later described as the original head of the Mafia in Texas. He was born about 1876 in Corleone, Sicily, the same hometown as early New York Mafia boss Mr. Murillo. Okay. Just a second. Now we're going to go on to Joseph Savillo. We're going to read a little bit about him. Okay. Mr. Savillo is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Savillo moved to Dallas as early as July 1928 when he was arrested for the murder of Joe DiCarlo at the St. Paul drugstore in Dallas. We have a St. Paul hospital. Reportedly, DiCarlo dying words were that the close-range shotgun blast to his abdomen was accidental. Based on this information, a grand jury did not issue an indictment against Savillo. Savillo was an expert marksman and regularly participated in skeet shooting competition as a longtime member of the Dallas Gun and Skeet Club. By the early 1930s, Savillo had organized a crew dubbed the Savillo Gang by the Dallas Morning News, which included cousins Sam Savillo, Louis Savillo, Leon Savillo, Frank Lanning, and Joe Cascio, among others. The gang operated as associates of the Dallas Piranio crime family and was involved in bootlegging and narcotics trafficking. Now, this is the 1930s. So when they say narcotics trafficking, they're talking about morphine and heroin. As I mentioned to you in part 2, all drugs were illegal in America. We didn't have the FBI. FBI came around in 1930s. We didn't have the CIA. CIA came around 1948 or 1947. We didn't have the DEA, which came around in the DEA came around in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, only thing we pretty much had was U.S. Customs. So in 1915, the Harrison Act prohibit cocoa leaves or cocaine and most definitely opium became illegal, or what we call illicit drugs. Now we know morphine has a medical use. Morphine is used, of course, when we have surgeries, etc. We know cocaine is an anesthetic. Now heroin, of course, as I mentioned 100 times, was actually created as an antidote for morphine addiction and we know narcotics or analgesics, pain relievers. They assist you with it's for cough suppression and of course anti-diarrhea. Now let's move on. The Seville gang main rival during this time was a Jewish gang headed by Nathan Bigler. And in 1935, when Bigler was sentenced to 10 years in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, another Jewish gangster, Louis Big Daddy Ginsburg, came to Dallas from Chicago to reorganize the remnants of Bigler's gang. Both the Seville gang and the Ginsburg gangs were heavily involved in the sale of and distribution of morphine and heroin. Okay, so the Sevillos collaborated almost exclusively with associates of Charles Lucky Luciano of New York City, while the Ginsburg drugs came from mobsters in Chicago. So once again, we're already in Dallas, Texas. We selling morphine and we selling heroin. And once again, we are a distribution center. Now, as I mentioned, Dallas, Texas was founded in 1845. This is most definitely after the Texas-Mexico Alamo War, in which Texas most definitely got assistance from the United States. This goes way back to that time. As I mentioned also, the Italians have close relationships with Spain. Okay, so now we have a fact, and us being a distribution center comes from the magazine in their article. So I'm gonna go into a few more other facts real quickly, because I want to get into the Bay of Pigs. Just a second. Let's move down to one more. Let me go over a few more facts. This is very important. So once again, Dallas, Texas, already have a connection with New York, and a strong connection with New York, and we have a strong connection with New Orleans. So New Orleans Mafia with Marcello. Now they said Marcello used to come to Dallas, Texas, to the East Dallas part of Dallas, Texas, have dinner. So once again, I know a few things for a fact. So once again, distribution center will mean that we are pushing drugs out and we're bringing money in. That's pretty much what it means. Now, just a second. We're going to talk about, John F. Kennedy getting assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Okay. Lee Harvey Oswald stayed in New Orleans a little bit before he came back to Dallas, Texas. He stayed in he rented a room in the Oak Cliff area, sort of by the Roosevelt High School neighborhood, out close to Beckley. Oak Cliff used to be predominantly white, pretty much, and during that time period, we had a few Cubans moved to Dallas, Texas. Now, they say Cubans really didn't come to America until the late 50s, like 59, when Fidel Castro took over. You had a lot of opposition toward Fidel Castro taking over. Now, the U.S. government tried to, take Cuba over and remove Fidel Castro from office. They call it the Bay of Pigs. Now, what's strange about this is that Marcello, according to D Magazine, he had some property in New Orleans. He had, he had a whole lot of land in New Orleans. And they said the land was sort of swampy or whatever. Now, this is what I read from D Magazine. Now, I also saw a documentary and it's called, it's about the JFK assassination. They have this man who was, two men who were, one who was in the CIA and one who is still in the CIA investigating this. Now that same land because the CIA also had some lands where they was training for the Bay of Pigs, and the land, you got the Mississippi River right there. Now I'm thinking, is this the same land that Mr. Mauricello had in New Orleans of the entire mafia? He's supposed to be, a real big boy in the Southwest Division of the Italian Mafia. Now, D Magazine says New Orleans may have been over the Dallas fraction, but Wikipedia says Dallas was pretty much independent. Because once again, we're a distribution center. We had the Jewish Mafia and we had the Italian Mafia. And we know we got the Mexican cartel. We have all the Hispanic gangs, as I mentioned, Texas Syndicate, Mexican Mafia. Now, the Texas Syndicate is whites and Hispanics. Mainly, Texas Syndicate started with Mexican immigrants. I know some white people that were actually, creating cocaine in the late 70s who were in the Texas Syndicate. So you got the Texas Syndicate, you got the Mexican Mafia. Once again, you got the Aztec Barrios, you got the Tango Blast, the prison game. You got MS-13, etc. And you have the different cartels. As I mentioned previously, are the cartels, are they working for the Spanish? For the Italians. Spain and Italy are like cousins. France, all of them, once again, the great Roman Empire, which consists of some Russian states, Germany, British, the Swiss, parts of Africa, Saudi Arabia, it goes on and on. So they're closely related by the word Roman. I was watching HGT House Hunters. That's one of my favorite shows. And they are talking about, have an Italian couple in Italy. And, he got a new girlfriend. She moved in from Australia. She's still Italian. And he's trying to teach her, this is Roman. This is Roman. This is what we call Roman. Okay, so that's the key word, Roman. All right, so once again, so the land that they're practicing on to take down Fidel Castro, which they're going to call the Bay of Pigs, and this is in the late 60s, right when John F. Kennedy gets in office. The early 60s. He gets in office, and John F. Kennedy is supposed to, this consists of anti-Castro Cuban immigrants, okay? Cuban immigrants. And I think the documentary is called JFK Assassination / Lee Harvey Oswald such and such. Okay, it's on the History Channel. Now they say the CIA asked the mafia to assist them in taking down Castro. Now, as I mentioned in another part, I felt like there was some conflict between the Italian Mafia in America and the Italian Mafia in Sicily. It has to be a conflict because Fidel Castro kicked out the Italian Mafia in Cuba, and he cut off the ties with America. He cut out trading and everything with America. Because once again, his family is from Spain. Okay, so we're going to talk about some few facts. Before I move on, I'm going to come back to the Bay of Pigs. Joe Hicks, he also supposedly, I haven't really clarified if Joe Hicks is African American or if he's white. We'll find out at a later date. But he has people flying to Colombia and to get cocaine, and he has people flying to Thailand. This is right after the Vietnam War. So that's someone that's early, that's also bringing in drugs to Dallas, Texas, to distribute. And they say 50%, according to the D magazine article, 50% of African Americans were his customers. Okay, but let's get back to the New Orleans mob boss. He's coming to Dallas. They're having meetings in New York. They're, Mr. Marcello, who got deported. He's coming to Dallas, Texas. So, and mainly in the East Dallas suburb. Okay, so supposedly he bought some major land in New Orleans, and he got the city to give him like $5 million to redevelop it. And this is in New Orleans. Now, let's go back to the Bay of Pigs, because John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas. Okay, he was killed in Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans first, and they say he went missing for a month. They say he went to this training thing once again, and it was called the Bay of Pigs. They go to Nicaragua, they go to Guatemala, and they say John F. Kennedy didn't give them full support. He brought back the airplanes that was assisting them, and a lot of Cubans and individuals that were trying to overthrow Fidel Castro got murdered. Okay, now one part in the scene, they're talking about the bus line, and this is sort of I don't know what part of Oak Cliff. It's close to North Oak Cliff, because once again in the 60s, still in the 60s, Oak Cliff is pretty much predominantly white. You have a few black parts. You have the bottom. You have the part about Bonneview. Sort of like the Lancaster Keys area. But the other parts are predominantly white. Now you have, of course, Cubans. A few Cubans are moving in. But once again, Cubans didn't really migrate to America until the late 50s, like 58, 59, when Fidel Castro took over. So you got the Bay of Pigs. So pretty much what they're saying that led to John F. Kennedy assassination is that he crossed out the anti-Castro men. He crossed them out. He pretty much crossed them out. The goal was to get Fidel Castro or overtake Cuba, and it didn't happen. He pulled back. So was Kennedy under pressure? Did he cross out the Italian American mafia? Did he cross them out? Because Lee Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans, and then he came to Dallas, Texas. Once again, the Italian mafia. The Italian mafia is very strong in New Orleans, and it most definitely was very strong in Dallas, Texas. So did the Italian mafia really pressure or influence Lee Harvey Oswald to commit the assassination of John F. Kennedy? They said he went to the Russian embassy when he went to Mexico. And Russia had close ties to. Okay, once again, I apologize. Once again, we're talking about the Bay of Pigs. We're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald being in New Orleans, and then, he's been in Dallas, Texas, Southwest Division of the Italian Mafia. Dallas, Texas, or Texas, most definitely is one of the big 3 or 4 in drug trafficking. New York. You got California, you got Miami, and most definitely you had the Midwest, which Jimmy Hoffa, the Irish, as Al Prophet calls him, the Irishman. And I mentioned in the Irish Mob, the documentary by Netflix. They bring it in. They're getting cocaine from Colombia and Jamaica, as early as the 60s. It could have been more than that. I haven't really researched if they was doing it earlier than that. But I can tell you the Dallas fraction of the Italian Mafia was selling heroin and morphine in the 1930s. So, Dallas, Texas is already in the game, and probably was in the game anyway because Spain conquered Texas. Spain conquered South America, conquered half of all of the Caribbeans, conquered half of North America. So, they was feeding, the Spanish conquistadors was feeding slaves cocoa leaves, long before, cocaine was even created. So once again, we're a distribution center, and it's more logical, because when I look at the drugs, scene or whatever, I really don't want to get into that. I'm just gonna say, but I do see some change, when the Bloods and Crips come about. The 60s, there was a lot of assassinations. We had Medgar Evers in the late 50s. You had John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. You had most definitely Martin Luther King. He was assassinated. When Martin Luther King got assassinated, half of America rioted. In the documentary Bloods and Crips, the Crips started in the late 60s, actual gangs. So, as my grandmother told me, she's a city girl, and living in the city has its perks. So, and early on, we was most definitely happy just to be living in the city. Life was good, compared to what it used to be. Yes, it was segregation and, things of that nature. And most definitely it was discrimination. But was it anything compared to being, living in slavery? Of course, I don't know that answer for sure. But I do know from my grandmother that living in the city had its perks. And that's for another documentary, The Lifestyle of a Professional Booster. Now, let's go back to Lee Harvey Oswald. Just to make a long story short, the Dallas fraction of the Italian Mafia and the New Orleans fraction could have most definitely played a major part in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and probably later on Robert Kennedy. Once again, all over the Bay of Pigs, and pretty much the same thing that leads to the Iran-Contra affair, Nicaragua. Still trying to get, Fidel Castro. Now, they say in a documentary that they had a signal where Fidel Castro was actually listening when John F. Kennedy got assassinated. So, either the Cubans or the Italian Mafia was, instrumental in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, our prophet mentions Jimmy Hoffa, the Irish Mafia. But as I mentioned, to you previously, the Italians and Irish, had a conflict early on in the 1800s. I think the Italians ended up killing a police officer, and they got off of it, and the Irish lynched about 9 Italians. So that's sort of how the conflict started. Now, the Italians, used to be very feared, as they mentioned in the inside the American Mafia. They was highly feared. And one reason they could have been highly feared is because of John F. Kennedy assassination. Anybody that can kill the president most definitely has to be highly feared. So I'm not saying they did, but I'm just saying if they did, the FBI, CIA, or whatever pretty much stayed in their lane or whatever. But Ronald Reagan administration, once again, I mentioned his whole administration was pretty much Irish. And, he pretty, sort of pretty much prior to his administration, but they pretty much went after, I think they pretty much went after the Italian-Spain connection. And, all those Caribbean islands, the whites have Spanish descent. As as well as the blacks. Especially they call them Afro-Americans. They have African descent. They come, the Spanish conquistadors, Portugal, etc. They brought slaves to all those islands, and they breeded. They had sex. So you got an Afro population in all those countries. Afro-Spanish combination. So I pretty much wanted to update that. I want to talk a little bit about the Bell Pigs, John F. Kennedy assassination, because it happened in Dallas, Texas. So what I'm saying is you do not want to underestimate the Italian Mafia in Dallas, Texas. They were already transporting drugs in Dallas, Texas. Now, you most definitely don't want to underestimate the Jewish Mafia. Okay? Once again, the Jewish Mafia was selling morphine and heroin, and most definitely selling illegal alcohol in Dallas, Texas also. The bootleg or whatever. We still have bootlegs today. Every community still have bootlegs. Bootleg everything. One thing I want to mention about the topic, and one thing I haven't brought up that much was the Jewish Mafia, or the Jewish impact on crime, because according to the documentary Dallas back then, the Jewish was pretty much instrumental in building a lot of these buildings that we have in our downtown area. Now, whether they done it legally or whether it was drug money, etc., we did have a Jewish Mafia and most definitely Italian Mafia, according to D Magazine. And pretty much how they reported, we have Decker Jail down here. Decker Jail is a former sheriff. He was in Dallas. He had to turn around, if I'm not mistaken, either the New York Mafia, Chicago Mafia, because they were making so much money down here. He met them. They was all trying to come down here and get in on the money that the Italian American Mafia was making in Dallas, Texas. They pretty much also reported in the D Magazine article. Let me get the title for you. If I can give you the title just a second. Hold on. Get the title for you just a second. Who's Behind the Mafia in Dallas? D Magazine. Okay, and this article was really written in December 1977. Joe Hicks and his crew got arrested, they got 15 years. Once again, they flying to Colombia right after the Vietnam War, and they flying to Thailand, and that's in the Golden Triangle. Once again, the Golden Triangle is Thailand, Burma, and Laos. Burma used to be in India. I told you about the British Indian Company, or the Opium War between British and China. Then later on, the French got involved. China was filled with opium dens, because back then they were just smoking. They're smoking. Then when they immigrated to Dallas, to America, they brought opium with them. And I also mentioned, the major cities that have a Chinatown, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, have had a heroin addiction problem over the years. Now, in the documentary, in the article, in Dallas Magazine, Who's Behind the Mafia in Dallas, is that they also say that, when we were a distribution center, a major distribution center, we were pushing drugs to New York, Chicago, and those other areas. We pushing it out. So if you want a drug trafficking job, this was the place to get it or whatever. Because we're pushing it out and we're bringing the money back in. Now, one thing that my mind is blank right now. I think I was talking about the Jewish Mafia and their impact. But the Jamaicans are going to come to Dallas, Texas with crack. And that's one thing that we're going to explore in a big secret. You know, the Jewish were already, once again, selling morphine and heroin before World War II, before Hitler. And there's a lot of things that happened when Hitler took over. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research to see how that affect the Jews in Dallas, Texas, as it relates. Now, once again, this is about Dallas, Texas, crime. Once again, crime perspective today, making amends, telling our side of the story. I wanted to discuss the crack epidemic, and I done got into a whole lot of other stuff. So I'm trying to remember. My mind is blank right now. But I had to give this update. Once again, I want to talk about the Bay of Pigs, which, in my opinion, have led to the Iran-Contra affair. Is there a major conflict? Now, I read one article, and this is recently, that say 80% of cocaine that go into Europe goes through Italy. Okay? Goes through Italy. So, I've been asking that question. Who's the great Roman Empire? Is it Italy? Is it Spain? Christopher Columbus was Italian, and he was selling for the Spanish. So, and like I say, they're like cousins. They have some ancestry together. But, so Dallas, Texas was most definitely already in the game.